Okay, so in this week's parsha, there's the parsha of the Aseres HaDibros, obviously, and the Aseres HaDibros, like we know, is the Dvar Hashem that Hashem gave Klal Yisrael at Har Sinai. It's the basis and the underlying foundation of Torah. But obviously, when Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Har Sinai, he brought with him all the rest of the Torah and Torah Sheba'al Peh and Torah Shebachsav and etc. And although, of course, there's a unique chashivas that the Aseres HaDibros has, it's not unique in any practical way. Meaning, there's not a din that you have to keep the Aseres HaDibros more than you have to keep the rest of the Torah. Now, I wanted to talk about the Aseres HaDibros in that context a little bit, and I'll tell you what I mean. Let's start with this. In the I think it's in the late 1940s, there was a young Bedouin shepherd who was herding his cattle along the banks of the Dead Sea, today part of the West Bank, and he lost one of his animals, and he followed the animal and discovered a little cave, and in the cave he found some very old-looking pottery and some scrolls and etc. And he brought it back to the village elders, who couldn't translate it. They gave it to a Syriac priest who was around there, who was able to read what it said. And from this, grew the whole discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Qumran caves. I think the Dead Sea Scrolls today, by now, is something everybody has heard of. But in those days, in the 40s and 50s, I think there was a race against time, because the Bedouins who lived locally, who realized that these antiquities were very valuable, were trying their best to find as many of them as they can. At that point, that area was not controlled by the Israeli government, and I think the French and British and some American scholars and experts, Chachamim and Chekrim, made a big effort to try to win this race and get all these antiquities first. And there was they combed through hundreds, maybe thousands of square meters to try to find all the antiquities possible. And I think over time they discovered 11 or 12 caves, and in those caves, hundreds, really over 1,000, but hundreds of unique things that they hadn't known of or had before. And they discovered tremendous antiquities, all dating back to the period 200-300 years before the Churban up till the Churban. It seems to have abruptly ended at the Churban time, and that's what all these ksavim and things that were found from date to. Now, later, Israel took control of the area after 1967, and eventually got control of most of these antiques. And today, in Yerushalayim, near the Knesset and the court, there's a museum, the Israel Museum. I think that's where it is. Actually, maybe I'm wrong. And there's the Shrine of the Book. I've been there, and you could see the Shrine of the Book. It's where the Dead Sea collection is housed. Sometimes they travel to other places in the world, but you could see a scroll of Yeshaya and certain ancient and very, very pertinent finds that were found in the Dead Sea. Now, there's hundreds of items that they found there, and tons of fragments and bits and pieces of stuff. But B'Seich HaDvarim, what they found is something interesting, and that's really what I want to open with. They found over there a cloth from tefillin. They found more than one pair of tefillin there. But they found a cloth from a pair of tefillin, and in the cloth of the tefillin, they found something very interesting. It has over there the parshiyos that we have. It has the Arba parshiyos that we have, Kadesh, V'Haya, V'Chulu, and then following in there is the Aseres HaDibros as well. Meaning they have the psukim of the Aseres HaDibros. Now I'm glossing over. It's not exactly what I'm saying. There's a little more details in this fragment. You could look up this fragment. This fragment is searchable. You could look up this fragment online. But they have over there in the fragment of the tefillin, there's Aseres HaDibros. Now, which is interesting, because we don't have Aseres HaDibros in our tefillin, and we don't even have Aseres HaDibros in our davening per se. But it seems that there was a group of Jews who lived 2,000 years ago, who had the Aseres HaDibros in their tefillin over there. Now, who were these Jews who were living in the Qumran caves, who were living over there and brought their ksavim there, their cloths and etc.? So this is a big dispute amongst the chaykrim and the historians. Some say that there was Jews actually living there. Some say that they just brought them there, just brought their stuff to hide them towards the Churban time. Meaning, so these could be old and valuable parchments that they had, but they were just bringing them there so that they could survive, the impending doom that Eretz Yisrael was facing, under the Roman invasion. Be it as it may, some Jews were either living there or hiding them there. Now the question is, who were those Jews? Now there's a dispute amongst the Chaykrim. Some say it was based on various historical documentation from the time, not Jewish historical documentation, but historical documentation from the time, that they were the Essenes. Others said that the Baisusim that Chazal referenced a few times. Both of these are decentish guess as to who it could be, because both of these, the Baisusim and the Essenes, their claim to fame was that they were more machmer than the Chachamim. They weren't more meklin. And some of the Takanas HaKahal, like the Kehila forming documents that were found in the Qumran caves, in the Dead Sea collection, is the private rules of this sect, of this group that's living there. And their sect, the rules that they're delineating and spelling out over there, are more machmer in certain ways than the halacha psuka that the Chazal say. So it matches for them to be possibly the Baisusim or the Asiyim. Now, be it as it may, and that's not my job over here to try to figure out which one of those it was. The point is that there was a sect of Jews who were not part of the Prushim, who were not part of what we would call the Messiah that we have on what it means and what the halachas are and what our tefillin is supposed to look like, that had tefillin that had something different. Now, it shows you that there was a point in time, when prioritizing the Aseres HaDibros, or elevating the Aseres HaDibros to a unique perch and making it more central or more important than other parts of Yiddishkeit or other mitzvahs, well, there was a time like that, and there was a time in that window of time that we're discussing is when Chazal made what you could say is a major change to the liturgy. They changed how we daven, and they changed how we prioritize and frame Aseres HaDibros, and that's what I really want to discuss. So, as follows: there's a Mishnah in Masechtas Tamid, Bakanta Mishnah. The Mishnah in Tamid in the 5th parak says as follows, and it's describing the tefillah in the Beis Hamikdash that they would daven, and this is brought in the Gemara in Brachas and Tafid Aleph and Beis in its own way, and we'll see. We'll hook up to the Gemara in a second. But the Mishnah in Tamid says as follows: Amalem HaMamuna. The Mamuna said, Baruch Hu bracha achas, make one bracha, which the Gemara in Brachas tells us was Ava Rabba, was Birchas HaTorah of sorts. The Hein Baruch Hu, then Karu Aseres HaDvarim, read the Aseres HaDvarim, meaning Aseres HaDibros, then Shema, V'hayim Shemaya, V'yayimer, Baruch Hu Sa'am Shalosh Brachas, Emes V'yatziv, V'avoida, U'Birchas Kayanim, and then it continues on. So, you see in this Mishnah in Talmud that at least to say that tefillah in the Beis Hamikdash included the Aseres HaDibros at a very focal point. The middle of the Birchas Krias Shema, together with Krias Shema, right before Krias Shema, preceding Krias Shema, was the Aseres HaDibros in like a tefillah form, sort of, but really what it shows is the centralization, meaning it shows how the Aseres HaDibros were like a focal point of the davening. Now the Gemara in Brachas and Tafid Beis Mid Aleph, it's a famous Gemara. The Gemara says as follows: Amar Yehuda Shmuel, Af Bigvulin Bikshu Likros came. Even in Chutzlar, it's outside the Beis Hamikdash, they wanted to do like this, to read the Aseres HaDibros as part of Birchas Krias Shema. Ela shekvar batlam b'nei tarumas haminim. But we pulled it back. We don't do that because of the tarumas haminim, which we'll see in a second what it is. Tani Nami Yachi, we learned as well. Reb Nasa Naimer Bigvulim Bikshu Likros Kain Ela shekvar batlam b'nei tarumas haminim. In Bigvulim they wanted, but shekvar batlam they were already mevatel. Now this diukim in the lashon over here, if they actually ever got it set up and then pulled it back again, or shekvar batlam it never got set up. This is a discussion, we'll see maybe. And then the Gemara says more. Rabbi Bar Chana Saval Mikvenu B'Sura. Rabbi Bar Chana later on, years later in Surah and Bavel, thought to reinstitute this custom of saying that Aseres HaDibros. Some layer of Chista. Kvar Batal M'Pnei Terumas Aminim. No, you can't do that. You can't bring it back. It's already batal because of the Terumas Aminim. Ameimar Saval Mikvenu B'Narda. Ameimar wanted to reinstitute it in Narda. Amle Ravashi Kvar Batal M'Pnei Terumas Aminim. No, too late. We already mevatel because of the Terumas Aminim. It's no longer something that we can bring back. Now, so you see over here, very interestingly, you see that the Gemara tells us that Chazal, in the time when there was still Aseres HaDibros being done in the Beis Hamikdash, meaning towards the end of Bayis Sheni, during the Tkufas HaTanoim, during the Tkufah of the Mishnayos, Chazal recognized that there was a major risk, that there was a whole sect or sects of Jews who were learning from this or being taught to understand from this, that the Aseres HaDibros takes precedent and priority over the rest of the mitzvahs, and that potentially there's a dual-tiered mitzvah structure where not all mitzvahs are equally important and not all chalakim of the Torah are equally important. And because of that, Chazal removed this, or at least didn't allow it to take root as part of the tefillah, as part of Krias Shema or Birchas Krias Shema for daily davening. Now, what's interesting is that you see how wichtig it was, is that the Gemara brings that various Hameiraim and later Darius tried to reinstitute it, but we're always reminded Kvar Batlu Mipnei Terumas Aminim. Now Rashi Afanart and Tafid Beis Mid Aleph from Brachas explains what Terumas Aminim is. Rashi says Shal Yomru L'Amei Haaretz Ein Shara Torah Emes. The bad actors, the nefarious actors, the ones who are trying to split away from the Prushim, from the Chachmei Talmud, from the Messiah of Klal Yisrael, are telling the Amaratzim Ein Shara Torah Emes, that the rest of the Torah is not Emes. V'teidu Shein Kairin Al Mashayim HaKadosh Baruch Hu V'Shamim Pim Yisina. And you want to know that what we're telling you is true. You want a proof that we are correct and that not all of the Torah is equal and that there's a dual system. Look, even the Prushim in the Beis Hamikdash, they don't read the whole Torah. They only read Aseres HaDibros. You see, they themselves don't prioritize it so much. Now Rashi is really quoting what's Mefurish Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi in Brachas in the first parak, the Yerushalmi says it gives a little explanation, and the Yerushalmi says, it starts the verse as follows: Amar Abba, in min hada les shma minach klum, she'aseres hadibros hein in gufa shel shma, the matani Rav Shmuel ben Nachman, and Matavai number 1 second. The Gemara says as follows: it ends up saying, Pnei mayin kairinaisen, why don't we read it anymore? Pnei tinas haminim, because of the tinas haminim, shlo yehi oimrim, elu levadam nitnu le'Moshe Messina. So they shouldn't say these alone were given to Moshe Messina. So Rashi is paraphrasing this Yerushalmi. Rashi doesn't quote it as Yerushalmi. Rashi is essentially paraphrasing this Yerushalmi, that there is a tarumas haminim, some sort of bad actors in play who are trying to change Klal Yisrael's mind as to what's important and what's not important. Now, who exactly these minim are? There's a lot of candidates. It could be the Tztukim, it could be the Baisusim, it could be the Assyrians, it could be the early Christians. It's hard to say with any absolute veracity which one of these groups it is. And although we're generalizing them, they all were engaged in attacks on the authority of Chazal and on the authority of Torah Sheba'al Peh, and to a certain degree on Chazal's interpretation of the Torah Shebachsav afilu, and the hierarchy and the prioritization of particular mitzvahs over the other. And because of that, Chazal pulled back from having this as part of the tefillah. Now, what we saw from the Qumran caves is you see how the Aseres HaDibros and incorporating it into all sorts of important locations, like incorporating it with the Parshias of Krias in the Tefillin, was like the battleground between the Chachamim and these other sects. Now, it's hard to say with any exactitude who the sect was that was in the Qumran caves, but it was one of these sects, one of these Terumas Aminu that we're referencing is who we're talking about. Now, Chazal pulled it out of the davening. So now, what's Lamaisa? Bizman Hazeh. First of all, we don't know of these sects anymore. They're not relevant in our lives. And second of all, did Chazal just take it out, like from the Beis Hamikdash, or from putting it mamash as a chelik of the tefillah, or were they again saying in general? So this is a big tumult in the Paiskim. And as follows: there's a tshuva from the Rashba, chelik Aleph and Simkuf Pedal. The Rashba says as follows: Shaltem Mahu loymar Aseres HaDibros b'shachar b'Beis HaKnesses. The Vishayesh Anashim Reitzim Lahanik B'Tzibur Kain Roy Lasses Kainim Lav. The Shail to the Rashba is, it's a short tshuva as is the normal derech. Is it appropriate to say Aseres HaDibros and Shul or not? Tshuva Zak the Rashba Asher Lasses Kain. Even though the Mishnah and Talmud says Amalim Mamuna Baruch Bracha Achas V'Heim Baruch V'Kara Aseres HaDibros Shema V'Haim Shema, you see that they did it. Kfar Batlam the Terumas Aminim, it's already taken away. It was removed because of the Terumas Aminim. Kedisa Parakama the Brachas the Garsim Hasan V'Kara Aseres HaDibros Some Revealim Ashmul Bigvul and Bikshul the Kreis and Al Shekvar Batlam Rabbi Rochana Tana Savam Mekrinu Amalei Rashi Kfar Batlam. So the Rajba says it's open shot. It's a Mefurish Gemara. Hagam the Mishnah and Talmud says that we do say the Aseres HaDibros as part of the Birchas Krias as part of Krias itself, but the Chachamim already pulled it back because of the Terumas Aminim. We don't do it anymore. Now, what's very strange is that if you look in the Torah in Siman Aleph and Arachaim, the Torah says as follows: V'toiv lev Parshas HaKedah, Parshas Haman, the Aseres HaDibros, Parshas HaKabanis. In the list of things that the Torah brings, call it the extra credits of sort, meaning toiv leimar. You're supposed to say them, but like extra credits of sorts. The Torah says, included in the list, Parshas HaKedah, Parshas Haman, Aseres HaDibros, Parshas HaKabanis. You say Aseres HaDibros every day. And Rabbi Yosef, right off an art, asks, he says, I don't understand. He says, what happened to the Kfar Batlam Aminim, Terumas Aminim? What happened to that? The Hamaretz, Zak to Beis Yosef, Ikel Meimar, I'll give you a teretz. The Hainu Dafka B'Tzibur. When did Chazal say not to say it anymore, to take it back and to stop saying because of Terumas Aminim? That's to say it B'Tzibur. Why? Because by centralizing it, by creating some sort of emphasis on the Aseres HaDibros, by making it like the centerpiece of the davening, that shows a certain chshivas to it that could easily be misconstrued and used as a point of argumentation against Chazal's Messiah. Avol b'yachid, the lakim mishum terumas aminim. There is no terumas aminim b'yachid. You're just an individual. You're davening. You're saying things that are important to you. Toiv la'imram. It's good to say them. Shal yedei kein yizker ma'amid harsinai b'chol yom v'tachzik amunasei b'zeh. Because through that you'll remember that ma'amid harsinai and your amunah bin ischazek alidezeh. So interesting is that the Beis Yosef frames it as an amunah thing, meaning because we know there's a dual purpose to ma'amid harsinai. Of course, at ma'amid harsinai, it was the Hashem was Kabbalah HaTorah. Hashem gave the Torah to Klal Yisrael, and of course there was these Aseres HaDibros that were said mipi Gvura Mamish, right? Meaning that they're some sort of higher level of revelation. But there's a second thing. There's a subtext. Is the Chizik and Amunah, the Gilei Ashchina, the Maimed Har Sinai, which is the centerpiece of Amunah. That the Beis Yosef says is worthy for every individual on his own to bring in. Now, what's interesting is that we know Rashi and Chumash brings this down in Parshas Yisro. He brings the pasuk says esluchas the pasuk says esluchas ha'evim v'atayra v'mitzvah asher kasafti lehiroisam. Rashi says kol sheish meis v'shalish esher mitzvahs b'chlal Aseres HaDibros. All 613 mitzvahs are incorporated or are referenced or included in the Aseres. They were saying Rabbeinu Sadia Pirish b'Azhara sheyasel l'chol dibur v'dibur mitzvahs hatluyos by. And Rashi quotes the Azhara from Rav Sadia Gaon. Azharas are a kind of song, outdated type of Pisman style song that we don't do anymore, but were very common and prevalent. There was Azharas comprised for all sorts of tzrachim, if you're interested in this. But Rashi quotes that the Rav Sadia Gaon in his Azhara that he has about Aseres HaDibros, he references how all the mitzvahs are included. Now, granted, if you take a look in the Rav Sadia Gaon, Sam will just brush through this quickly. He in the Aseres he explains that the mitzvah, the Dibra of Anochi includes 80 mitzvahs, La'i is another 60, Leisis is another 48, Zachar is 75, Kavod Avicha is 77, Leisirtzach is 50, Leisinaf is 58, Leisignav is 59, Leisana Briacha Eichachar is 52, and Leisachman is another 54. If you tally all that up, that's 613. And all the different Rishonim in their not all different, but various different Rishonim in their ways explain this. And essentially, it's really a medrash. The medrash in Bamidbar in Parshi Gimel Pasuk in Ois Tesvav says Taryag mitzvahs blulis behem. The luchas was referred to as the Nachmad Mizav Malay Keterish Taryag mitzvahs blulis behem. It's all mixed into it. V'chein atamaitz Taryag Oisius yesh min anoichi ad shel riacha. There's Taryag Oisius connected Taryag mitzvahs Hashav Oisius, and the medrash says what it says. So Yich Shia the Aseres HaDibros is first of all a touchstone for our emunah, touchstone for Klal Yisrael's emunah, for the Gila Hashchina, for Hashem revealing Himself, and it's a chizik in emunah, and it's also like a condensed version that is easily, it's supposed to hold within it all the 613 mitzvahs, and with a little bit of education, you could chapsach onto that. So the Beis Yosef is saying that it's wichtig to say it every day. The Torah and the Beis Yosef is explaining that for Yachid to say it is important every day. Now the Marshal in the Tshuva in Siman Samach Daled, the Marshal rather says mitzvah gedolah la'amra. He says it's a big mitzvah to say it. He says one second. So he says aval la'amra b'chol boker l'chvei da Torah l'chvei da Hashem ha'neira she'aseres HaDibros chakukim beluchas michtav elikim, to say it every morning l'chvei da Torah, which I think is like what Rashi and the Rasag, or l'chvei da Hashem is the emunah. Ha'neira she'aseres HaDibros chakukim beluchas michtav elikim, mitzvah gedolah la'amra. It's a big mitzvah. V'chein kasva HaTorah she'tayv la'amra. It's good to say it. I say it right before Baruch Shamar. Kik beBaruch Shamar yesh pei zayin tevis al derech hapasik roisha kesem paz. The pasuk is in Yiddish medrash al pasuk rishon sheba Aseres HaDibros roidish tam yochel d'vishanas Baruch Shamar. And he has a few different reasons why he says it where he says it. But b'cholef, and he says that it's a mitzvah gedolah la'amra. The Marshal says. So the Marshal and the Beis Yosef and the Torah are all saying that it's wichtig to say it. Now what's interesting is the Marshal and the Beis Yosef seem to be avoiding the nakuda that the Gemara seems to go against it. Meaning the Rashba goes Kipshuta, the Rashba says the Gemara says not to say it. The Torah, the Beis Yosef and the Marshal, they seem to be saying there's a difference. That's not to say it b'tzibur, but to say it b'yachid is not such a problem. In fact, to say it b'yachid is a maila. Now, the Bechar Shar in Brachas and Nafid Beis and Aleph, half an art, the Bechar Shar over there, he brings down something interesting. He holds that v'hashta leka minim, Bisman is that there are none of these minim anymore, and therefore, Hayos, the whole chashash that Chazal had was because of particular, sectarian groups that were trying to undermine Chazal's authority and Chazal's Messiah. So Memela, Bisman Azeh, when those kilo, that Muhammad is not existing anymore, the battlefront is not about the prioritization of the Aseres HaDibros, so therefore it snaps back and it's chayzer how it used to be, and therefore there's a reason to say it Bisman Azeh. Now this is what the Bechar Shar says. And it's a shvara ma'isa because, and the Chida we'll see soon asks on this, is because you could be chayzel l'kilkula once Chazal already took it away, once it was nisvatel, and befrata you see in the Gemara that they tried to reinstitute it several times, and it says that they weren't matzliach. Meicha takes it to go back now and reinstitute it. It's a bit of a chiddush, but the Bechar Shar says this, and in on Orach Chaim in his Hagoyos and Shulchan Aruch, he reiterates this, and he makes reference to Rav Sadia Gaon of Kol Taryag Mitzvahs Klulim Aseres HaDibros. He brings the Medrash Tanchuma that we said, and he's a strong proponent of saying it. Now, in Shulchan Aruch, if you look, the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim and Siman Aleph and Sefei says Toiv Loim Parshas Akei, the Parshas Amam Aseres HaDibros, Parshas Oila Mincha V'Shlam V'Chatzos V'Asham. Zakter Ramah Haga V'Dafka B'Yachid Mutar Loim Aseres HaDibros. Only B'Yachid you're allowed to say Aseres HaDibros B'Chol Yom. Aval Asur L'Oimrim B'Tzibur. And the Makar for this is the Chuvas HaRashba. So the Mechaber leaves it open. Now the Ramah, it's unclear if he's actually arguing the Mechaber, because the Beis Yosef, who's the Mechaber, is clearly saying that he agrees with the Ramah's distinction between Yachid and Rabbim. So it's unclear if the Ramah is actually arguing with the Ramah, or he's just elucidating the Mechaber. But as always, Dr. Ramah and the Mishabur Afanart brings down a biyachid dafka shalei b'teicha tvila, aval l'kveya b'teicha brachas gam liyachid aser. he's quoting from the Oilas Talmud and that's Tzachayim, that to be kaveid and davening even for Yachid is not allowed, because we have to be concerned with the Terumas Aminim. Yachid means you make it your business, it's your own structure, you do it when you do it. Now, what's interesting is that Al Pi Kabbalah, maybe it's not so simple. The Rav Chaim Vital and Shar Kavanis in the Yonam Berachas HaShachar, he brings as follows. He says, "Gam hayisi noyeg leimer b'chol yom kaidem atzila parshas amam v'yud HaDibros." My personal minig was to say the Yud Varm and Aseres HaDibros l'kiyaytze b'zeh parshas Acharos u'mena'ani meiri zatzal shaloi la'amram. The Arizal was mena'ing me from saying it. U'befrat b'Yud Dibros, especially the Aseres HaDibros, he said not to say. In his kirli taima shel davar. It says back in the day when Chazal, the Anshe Knesset Agdel, Masak and Tefillah originally, they included it. And then Chazal later took it out because Drumas Aminim. And this is like addressing what the Bechar Shar says and addressing these other shittas. He says very clearly, who's one who thinks that he's worthy of stepping in and undermining, so to speak, Chazal's Bittul Mishum Terumas Aminim? Now, I'm not Kabbalah certified, so I can't say if that Rizal saying that Kayayim, it's inappropriate even in say that tefillah, like it's damaging, because once Chazal took it out, it doesn't belong there anymore. Or Hitaka just means that the Gzeira is not batal, like that type of idea that Gzeira stays forever. But Yiach Shia, the Arizal seems to strongly say not to say it, and Al Pi Kabbalah maybe it's inappropriate. L'maisa, the Chida in several places in Birkei Yosef, Hafanart, and in various other svarim, the Chida writes that one could say it, and he even addresses the Arizal, and he says that maybe you could say that the Kapedis Arizal was Kaidem Tvila, the Dami Lamasha Batlum, Sharitzim L'Kvayim Tvila. Aval Achar Tvila, in Be'emtza Kviyas Limuda Yikrayim Shaper Dami. So the Chida, who's sensitive to what Arizal is saying, says that maybe we should only do it after davening or something, and that's a way to accomplish everything. Meaning, even the Arizal's masculine that saying Aseres HaDibros is Yisayidistic, it's foundational, and it's important. It's mechazik a person's emunah, it's mechazik his Kabbalah HaTorah, and maybe a person should say it, but he should be careful when he says it. In any case, the Chida and Birkei Yosef seems to go like the Shittas also, and Bekitzer, the halacha became that it's important for a person to say the Aseres HaDibros, every day. Toiv la'imroi, or mitzvah la'imroi, or mitzvah gedolah la'imroi, because it is mechazik a person's emunah, and it does have, kol Torah kula merumas inside of it. But to say it as a formal part of tefillah and, so to speak, elevated above everything else, that's problematic, and Chazal didn't want that. Now, keeping that all in mind, that should serve as a background to a minig that's relevant this Shabbos, but it's batzam klalistik shaila, and that is the question of standing by the Aseres HaDibros when they lay in the Aseres HaDibros in shul. Now, the minig nafutz and Klal Yisrael, I don't think by all Sfardim, but certainly by most Ashkenazim, the minig nafutz and Gans Klal Yisrael is to stand when we lay in the Aseres HaDibros in shul. Now, who exactly started that and when exactly it started is hard to point the finger to. What it is clear is that the Dvar Shmuel Abuav, and the Chida and Taivayin, and the Shari Ephraim and others, and even, as we'll see shortly, the Rambam, make reference to it. So clearly it's an ancient minig, it's an old minig that was pretty well established. And once a minig becomes well established, it's very hard to pull it back. But in light of this discussion of the danger, so to speak, or the risk of elevating and prioritizing the Aseres HaDibros, it's a questionable minig. Is it worth it to stand by the Aseres HaDibros, or is that itself giving root to a certain Terumas Aminim that would suggest that the Aseres HaDibros is more important than perhaps other halakim of the Torah? Now, to lay the groundwork over here, the Shulchan Aruch in Simkuf Mevav and Sifdal, it says, the Mechaber says, "Ein sarach lamed ma'omid be'shakarim b'Torah." A person does not have to stand when we're reading Krias HaTorah. Hagav yesh machmirim va'imdim v'chein asam aram. But there's machmirim that stand, and that was Maram's midig. Now the Mishabur brings down Kasav Pri Chadash v'Agra. The Iker Kisvar Rishon v'chein nagu. The Iker is like the Svar Rishon that you don't need to stand. Rabach b'Simon Kuf Memalef Kasav the Gam Hamaram moeded the Medina Shari. El the Svirle the Roy lahadav alamin v'shitzarach adam lahalis b'daita kishemei akira kefi akira keilu kibla oiser shamei ar Sinai. But a person, even the Maram didn't hold it. You have to stand. The Maram just held it was a nice chumrah because it helps the person conjure up in his mind as if he's right now being makabel the Torah Me'ar Sinai. B'Har Sinai Kol Yisrael Aimdim K'Dachsev Anochi Yemid Ben Hashem U'Vnechem Umishu Ish Chalosh V'Kashal Le'Lamed V'Yidei Ze Ein Daitim Yusheves L'Chaven Heitav L'Kal L'Kari Yesh L'Leishev. This is what the Mishabur brings B'Shem Da'achreinim, that if it's hard for a person, he doesn't have to stand. Now this is the Iker Din. Now it's easy to understand how the minhag to stand by when they're reading the Maimon Har Sinai and the Aseres HaDibros took root. Because if the whole idea of the Maram's Chumrah of standing during Krias HaTorah is so a person could conjure in his mind that right now he's living through and he's participating in Kabbalas HaTorah, so how much more so and how much more relevant that is when you're actually reading the Parshias of Kabbalas HaTorah. Now, that minhag is a minhag that developed. Now, the Rambam, in a tshuva that was more recently found, this is not a tshuva that the Gedolei Achronim had, although parts of this tshuva are quoted by earlier Svarim, and I think Rav Adia brings a raya from that maybe they did have this tshuva or whatever, but it's unclear, but parts of this tshuva, it seems, in some sort of fragment of this tshuva was available earlier, but the full tshuva was a tshuva that was later discovered, like one of these later kisvei yadus for the Merkitza and the Damim. And in the tshuva, it's a langa arichos, and the Shoyal asks the Rambam a whole discussion back and forth about a minhag that they had to stand by Aseres HaDibros, and then a new Rav came, and the Rav said that it's not good because it's Terumas Aminim, and it's a bad minhag. This is what the Chacham were looking to eradicate. And he brings the rayas from the Gemaras and etc. And they ask the Rambam, what's the appropriate tack to take over here? They bring both stadim, that a minhag is a good thing, and that Amida B'Shas, Matan Torah was integral to Matan Torah, and therefore it's sensible and it makes sense and it fits. And they bring Mitzacheni the fact that there's Terumas Aminim. The Rambam says as follows: Zeh asher hineg harav hanifter nishmasi eiden leishiv. This minhag that you're telling me that the Rav hanifter made, hu haroi v'rayosev rayis nechonis lefidini anshe heiyon ve'ein lahosev aleim. It will be appropriate in every place where the minhag is to stand. You have to stop them. Because this leads to hefsid in amunah. Because people are medameh, people who could be easily misled or misguided are going to think that there are parts of the Torah that are more important than the others. Now, what's interesting is the Rambam himself lived in a hotbed of Karaitism, where these arguments, not particularly to the Aseres HaDibros, but these arguments about what exactly is included in the Torah and if there is, a dual structure to it, was very much current events. And the Rambam writes that this is not a bygone concern. This is a current and relevant concern, and it's not a minhag. It should be nisvatal. People should not stand by this. Aseres HaDibros. It says v'zeh ra ad ma'od min haroy listem kol hapsachim shmevin l'zeh amunah ra. Any potential on ramp for amunah's rois, we have to close down. It says Mashach Ton Chacham Ha'echad Shebe Baghdad Umiktas Ha'aram Oisim Zeis Ein Zeraya B'Shem Panim L'Fishem Nimtza Anashim Chaylim Le'Nachli Abriya Me'anashim Kadeshi Yeshavim. You're going to tell me that there are some sick people, we should get everybody sick so everybody's equal? It's wrong. That's not the right minhag, and we have to do the right minhag. He says Ve'elu HaKaram Einim Ela Shakarin Oisim HaChacham Minim Ela Karin Oisim Stukim By Susim L'Hitzi Akusim etc. etc. And the Rambam Mamish makes note of the fact that this is a current events challenge, and this is something that shouldn't be easily, it's a minhag that should be dissuaded and thrown away. Now, Mitzacheni, other tshuvas who are not aware of the Rambam, like the Chida and the Ephraim Zalman Margolius and the Dvar Shmuel in particular, Shmuel Abuav and Tshuva Reisha and Vav, he has a whole arichas where he basically says it's important. He says that not to be mevatel long-standing minhagim, and there's a beauty in this minhag that it's lasses al libeinu be'esa ba'ina ahi derech kima. We get to relive the beautiful Maimon of Arsina, the Maimon of Gila Shechina that it was, and it's a Simana Milsel, it's Tesefes Kedusha, Emunus Halvavis, Zecher HaKabbalah Inarov, Amar Agdelahi, and many of these quotes, as he says, and the Memeli says it's not something that's bad, and it's a long Algemein minhag that Klai Yisrael has, and therefore it's a good minhag that people have to stand. He says, "Lefichach nagub mitzvah sakila begia tar elumay that Hashem mekadesh Aseres HaDibros yigimamidus rachamim leibav adakimim omel the Ramfan." That's what he says. Now, he does also address another nakuda. He says that hayos there are other places throughout Krias HaTorah where Klal Yisrael's minhag is to stand, and it's not only the Aseres HaDibros. I'm sorry, that's not what he says. He says the concern of the Terumas Aminim was to say it every day. He says that's batal. But if the once a year that we say it, and it's just on a one-off occurrence, twice a year that we lay in it, or whatever it is, or 3 times a year that we lay in that Aseres HaDibros, that's not a problem to stand. That's not a Terumas Aminim. So he gives such a teretz. Now, the Chida in Tovayin and Seminary Aleph, when he addresses it, he gives another interesting teretz, and he says that no, since we stand by other parts of the Krias HaTorah, it's not unique to standing with this part of the Krias HaTorah, so the Terumas Aminim is somewhat muted and blunted, and therefore there's not such a concern. Now, Reb Moshe in a famous tshuva in Archaim Mechelik Daled and Simchav Beis, and we're running out of time, so we'll have to be makatz over here, but Reb Moshe in a famous tshuva written to his son Reb David actually addresses this, and again validates Klal Yisrael's minig, and he says as follows. He says he brings a few of the different rationales, and he says he says that the minig l'chein. I'm just trying to get the words. L'chein bo'ovda zeh shenagu lam beis kriya zum pnei shezeh pnei shezachul Klal Yisrael ba'atzmai l'shmei pnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'atzmai shezeh davar hayoser gadol chshivas Yisrael b'shvil zeh tzricha l'chol havanas t'tayra hachanas t'tayra shedavar amuchan l'chol adam afshe efsher ulei lachash l'terumas meaning, even though it's possible for the meaning to make a mistake. B'svara ba'alma in l'hakbad l'shvil zeh chos man shal irish aminim yituas amarat lemekain. Because man, that it's not a mamish current thing, and we don't see that it's really happening. And there's all these various different rationales that make chilukim and say it's not negay. This is the minig, and it's a valid minig. Rabbi Vadia in Yechavadas, and I think in two places, Rabbi Vadia writes not like this, and Rabbi Vadia actually writes something interesting. He says that by him it's pashut that if the Chidah and the Dvar Shmuel would have known that the Rambam was so strongly opposed to it, they would have backed up their opinion. That this really opens up like the can of worms of like what do new finds, how do new kisveyadis and new finds contribute to the halachic discourse? And really we'll have to save that. That's a discussion for itself. The Chazon Ish Shita and many others weighed in on that. But Rabbi Vadia feels that these Meishivim would have folded if they knew the Rambam felt so strongly about it. There's many chuvas. Shem Zalman is a chuva. Moshe Steinbach has a chuva, and chuvas on Haggis where he says that the pshara is to stand up a little earlier. And what exactly the Haggis of various Gedolei Yisrael, I believe the Chazon Ish used to sit, Rabbi Yashiv maybe sat, the Stipler stood. There's various different Haggis amongst the Gedolei HaPoskim. But Yich Shiyah, in light of this discussion about how the Aseres HaDibros could be misused, is why standing by the Aseres HaDibros, which is a minig nafetz in Klal Yisrael, is a somewhat controversial and complicated minig that not everybody agrees should be done. Now, the Ravad Yugad in his tshuva, and we'll end off on this, and it's really a topic for itself. He ends off that there's a Masechta Seifrim, the Brisa says that Layu Oimid ben Yoshev, Yoshev ben Oimid, Sameach ben Amsablim, Amsablim ben Asmechem. Basically, the Hainu, there's a chiv not to be perished with tzibur, or a chiv, I like to say, a chiv to be normal, and therefore, if a person's in a shul where everyone's standing, everybody's sitting, he shouldn't be perished with tzibur, and this is not, the stakes are not so high to be perished, and he should do whatever it says. And even Rabbi Vadia, who says that he holds we should sit, agrees to that. So, this is just a little sampling of the various raid related to Aseres HaDibros, its chashivus, and its integration into our tefillah, into our laying, etc. And maybe, as a nispach to this, we'll revisit the idea of kisveyadis playing an important role in modern halacha, and how to look at them, the Briskrav, the Chazon Ish, etc. In any case, to be continued. Yashikayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.